small, quiet neighborhood, there lived a young girl named Jasmine. She wasn't like the other children in her neighborhood. While they played in the streets and dreamed of big things, Jasmine spent her days working hard to help her family. Her clothes were worn and her shoes had holes, but she never let her struggles show. Jasmine had learned to smile through it all, even when life felt impossible. Her family lived in a small, crumbling house on the edge of town. The walls were thin, and the roof leaked when it rained. Despite the challenges, Jasmine's mother always told her that dreams could change a person's life. "As long as you keep dreaming, nothing can stop you," her mother would say, a smile on her face, even as she worked long hours in the factory. Jasmine had dreams too. Big dreams. Dreams of a life where she didn't have to worry about the next meal or how to pay the bills. Dreams of helping her family escape the grip of poverty. But those dreams felt like they were locked in a cage, far beyond her reach. One day, while walking home from school, Jasmine heard a rumor about a millionaire named Thomas Blackwell. He used to be a powerful businessman known for his sharp mind and wealth that seemed endless. But that was before the accident. The accident that left him paralyzed, confined to a wheelchair for the rest of his life. Now he lived in a mansion on the outskirts of town, surrounded by silence and isolation. Jasmine didn't know much about Thomas Blackwell, except for the fact that he was once the richest man in the city. But what fascinated her more than his wealth was the way people talked about him now. They said he had given up on life. Some said he was bitter, angry at the world for taking away his legs. Others whispered that he was no longer interested in helping anyone, that his fortune was locked away and he didn't care about anyone anymore. But Jasmine couldn't shake the thought of him. She knew what it felt like to struggle, to feel as though the world had forgotten about you. And she thought that maybe, just maybe, this man who had once known what it was like to have everything might understand her pain. Jasmine spent the next few days thinking about him. She had nothing to lose. Her family was struggling and she had no way of changing her circumstances. She had only one thing to offer: hope. And hope, she believed, could be the greatest gift of all. It was a cold afternoon when Jasmine finally made up her mind. She gathered all the courage she could find and walked to the mansion on the hill. The walk was long and the wind bit at her skin, but Jasmine's resolve was stronger than the cold. She reached the gates of the mansion, which were high and intimidating. The mansion itself stood like a fortress, silent and grand, a symbol of the wealth and power that had once belonged to its owner. Jasmine hesitated at the gates. She wasn't sure what she expected, but she knew she had to try. She pressed the button on the intercom and waited, her heart pounding in her chest. After a moment, a voice crackled through the speaker. "Who are you?" the voice asked, sounding annoyed. "I'm Jasmine," she said, trying to sound confident. I need to speak with Mr. Blackwell." There was a pause. "Why would he want to speak with you?" the voice replied, clearly skeptical. Jasmine swallowed hard. "I have something to offer him. A trade," she said, her voice trembling but determined. "I'll trade him my leftovers for a miracle." The words hung in the air for a moment. The voice on the other end of the intercom seemed to laugh, a bitter, mocking sound that made Jasmine's heart sink. But she didn't turn away. She stood, tall, and waited. "You think your leftovers will change anything?" the voice said, a smirk evident in the tone. "What could you possibly have to offer someone like Mr. Blackwell? He has everything." Jasmine took a deep breath. "I'm not asking for money, I just want to give him something. I want to show him that not everything is lost. That even in the darkest moments there's still hope." There was silence on the other end for a long time. Jasmine's legs felt weak, but she refused to move. She couldn't let herself back down now. Finally, the voice spoke again. "Fine. Wait there." Moments later, the gates creaked open, and a figure appeared at the door. It was Thomas Blackwell in his wheelchair, his face a mix of curiosity and skepticism. He looked at Jasmine, who stood before him, small but unwavering. "Your leftovers, huh?" he said, his voice cold and distant. "What's this miracle?" you're talking about? Jasmine looked into his eyes. There was something broken in them, something she recognized. He had lost so much, just like her, and she believed with all her heart that she could help him find it again. I don't have much to give, she said softly, but I have hope. And sometimes hope is all we need. Thomas Blackwell didn't say anything for a long time. He just stared at her, unsure of what to make of her words. But there was something in her eyes that made him pause. Maybe, just maybe, there was more to this girl than he thought. Thomas Blackwell had spent years in the quiet confines of his mansion, a place that once symbolized power and success. Now it felt like a prison. His wheelchair was his only companion, and the grand halls that used to echo with laughter and the sounds of celebrations now stood still. He lived in a silence that was only broken by the occasional visit from a caretaker or the distant hum of the city below. The wealth that had once been his greatest asset now felt like a heavy burden, a reminder of all he had lost. When he first saw Jasmine standing at the gates, he had expected the usual. Another beggar. Another person hoping for charity, desperate for something they couldn't earn. But as she stood there with nothing but a few worn-out clothes and the faintest glimmer of hope in her eyes, something about her struck him. Her words had been foolish, almost laughable. I'll trade my leftovers for a miracle. What a ridiculous offer. He had everything, a mansion, wealth, and luxury. What could she possibly give him that he didn't already have? What did a poor girl know about miracles? He had seen it all, the world at his feet, the power to control, to dictate, and then one accident had taken it all away. Now he was just another man waiting for death, a prisoner in his own body. As Jasmine stepped inside the mansion, Thomas eyed her cautiously, unsure what to make of her presence. She was so young, so full of energy despite the world's cruelty. The contrast between her and him was sharp. She was brimming with life, while he was stagnant, stuck in a cycle of regret and bitterness. So, you really want to trade leftovers for a miracle, huh? Thomas said, his voice dripping with skepticism. He rolled his wheelchair toward her slowly, as if his every movement weighed a ton. What kind of miracle do you think I need exactly? Jasmine hesitated. Her mind raced, but her heart told her to speak from it. Not a miracle for you, Mr. Blackwell, a miracle for both of us. Thomas raised an eyebrow. The girl was speaking in riddles now. He had no patience for riddles, he had no patience for anything. His life had become a series of unanswered questions, each more painful than the last. Explain that to me, he said, folding his arms across his chest, trying to maintain the facade of someone in control, even though he felt anything but. Jasmine looked around the mansion, her eyes scanning the marble floors and the grand chandeliers that hung like forgotten treasures. It was beautiful, but there was an emptiness in the air that even the most expensive decor couldn't fill. It was the kind of emptiness she had seen in her own life when her family couldn't pay the bills and she felt like nothing could ever change. I know what it's like to be stuck, Jasmine said quietly, meeting his gaze. I've watched my family struggle, barely making ends meet, and I've learned that sometimes you don't need wealth or power to change things. You just need to believe that something better is possible, even if it feels impossible. Thomas snorted. And you think that's what I need? Some fairy tale belief? You don't know me, girl. I've been to the top of the world. I've seen everything that's worth seeing, and now I'm stuck here, unable to even walk. What do you think hope will do for me? Jasmine felt the sting of his words, but she didn't back down. Hope is what keeps us going. Without it, we're just waiting for the end. I've seen people with nothing rise, and I've seen people with everything fall. The difference is hope. It's what makes us stronger than we think. For a moment, Thomas stared at her, his expression unreadable. He had heard those words before. People had tried to give him hope, tried to make him believe in something, again. But it all felt hollow. What good was hope when the world had already taken everything from you? What good was belief when you were trapped in a body that refused to move? Still, something about Jasmine's words lingered in his mind. There was a rawness to her that he couldn't ignore. She wasn't asking for anything, not for herself, but for him. And in that moment, for the first time in a long while, Thomas wondered if she might be right. "Why would you offer me hope when you have so little yourself?" Thomas asked, his voice softer now, though still guarded. Jasmine's eyes softened. "Because sometimes, people with the least have the most to give. And I think deep down, you want to believe again. You want to know that your life has meaning. We all do." Thomas was silent. The mansion seemed even quieter now, as if the world had slowed down around them. He couldn't remember the last time anyone had spoken to him like this, like he wasn't just a man who had lost everything, but a man who still had a chance, but could he really believe again? Could he let someone like Jasmine make him see something different? "You don't know what it's like," Thomas muttered, almost to himself. "You don't know what it's like to lose everything." Jasmine nodded, her voice calm. "Maybe not, but I know what it's like to keep going when everything feels like it's falling apart. And that's why I'm here." For the first time, Thomas felt something stir within him. It was a small feeling, a flicker of something that hadn't been there in years. Maybe Jasmine wasn't just some hopeful girl with a silly idea. Maybe she was the one who could show him a way out of this darkness. He looked at her, his eyes filled with doubt but also curiosity. "I don't know if you can fix me, Jasmine, but I'll listen." And just like that, the door to something new, something unexpected, creaked open. The next few days felt like a strange dream to Jasmine. She had never imagined that she'd be spending so much time inside a mansion like Thomas Blackwell's. It was nothing like the cramped home she shared with her family. Every room was grand, filled with luxurious furniture and art that seemed to mock her humble existence. Yet every time she stepped inside, there was something missing, something she couldn't put her finger on. The mansion felt empty, just like Thomas. It was a place filled with everything money could buy, but lacking the one thing that mattered the most, a reason to keep going. Jasmine returned every day, bringing with her the simplest of meals, leftovers from her modest dinners. At home, a bowl of rice, a piece of bread, some cold stew, nothing fancy. She didn't expect it to be enough. She wasn't there for food. She was there to offer him something else, something far more valuable. Every time she came, Thomas seemed more intrigued by her persistence. He would sit silently as she laid the small meal on the table, a gesture that seemed to mean little in the grand scheme of things. But each time she spoke, he listened more intently. At first he would scoff and dismiss her, but as the days went by, his walls seemed to crumble a little more. One afternoon, Jasmine arrived with a simple plate of leftover stew and a loaf of stale bread. She placed it in front of Thomas without saying a word. Instead, she took a seat, across from him, her eyes watching him carefully. He didn't acknowledge her immediately, his gaze fixed on the window as if searching for something outside, something he couldn't reach. "Mr. Blackwell, I know you think I'm wasting your time," she said quietly, breaking the silence. "But I'm not asking for your fortune. I'm asking for you to believe that things can get better. You told me you were stuck. I think I understand what that feels like. I've been stuck too." Thomas didn't respond at first, but his eyes flickered toward her, a flash of something, like interest. Jasmine's words had found their mark, but he wasn't ready to admit it. He shifted uncomfortably in his chair, a slight grimace crossing his face. "I've lived a life of luxury," Thomas said, his voice low. "I've been to places most people only dream of. I've seen everything money can buy. But none of it matters now. I can't even walk. What good is it to have everything when you can't even use it?" Jasmine's gaze softened. "I've seen people with far less than you have still find joy, still find meaning in the small things. It's not about what you have, Mr. Blackwell. It's about how you choose to see it." Thomas shook his head, a bitter laugh escaping him. "What do you know about it? You think because you have hope that everything will just magically get better? That's not how the world works." Jasmine leaned forward, her voice steady but full of conviction. "Maybe not. But hope is a choice. And I'd rather choose hope than give in to the darkness." The words hung in the air between them, heavy, with meaning. Thomas didn't speak for a long time. He stared at the plate of food in front of him, his mind spinning with thoughts he didn't want to face. He had spent so many years drowning in his own bitterness, unable to see beyond his own suffering. But Jasmine was different. She wasn't asking for anything. She was simply giving hope, giving a chance, giving him a reason to try. As the evening wore on, Jasmine got up to leave. But before she could go, Thomas called out, to her, his voice quiet but sincere. "Jasmine, thank you for this." She turned, a small smile crossing her lips. "You're welcome, Mr. Blackwell. But remember, the miracle is not in the food. It's in what you choose to do with it." She left the mansion that evening. But something had changed. For the first time in years, Thomas felt something stir inside him. It wasn't hope, not yet, but it was the beginning of something. Something he hadn't felt in a long time. The desire to move forward, to stop living in the past. The next day, Thomas found himself staring at the plate of leftovers Jasmine had left behind. For the first time, he didn't see the food as a symbol of his own failure. Instead, he saw it as a reminder that no matter how broken he felt, there was still something left. He had something to give, something beyond his wealth or his physical abilities. Without thinking, he picked up the spoon and took a bite. It wasn't the finest meal he'd ever had, but for some reason, it tasted different today. It tasted like a new beginning. Jasmine had left him more than just leftovers. She had left him with a spark. And for the first time in a long while, Thomas Blackwell felt the stirrings of hope. The next morning, Thomas awoke to a quiet house, just like any other day. But today, something was different. The familiar weight of his wheelchair seemed lighter, as though the air around him had shifted. He had woken up with a strange sense of anticipation, a feeling he hadn't had in years. He had to admit, Jasmine's words had begun to gnaw at him, burrowing deep into his mind. The hope she spoke of was like a seed planted in the darkest corners of his heart. For the first time since the accident, Thomas didn't feel entirely trapped. He wheeled himself out of bed and stared out the window at the sprawling city below, his mansion looming over it all. The grandeur of the view had once given him a sense of power and control. Now it felt distant, cold and insignificant. It was as if the walls of his mansion, once a symbol of his dominance, were now closing in on him. But today, for some reason, he felt something stir inside him. It wasn't a grand epiphany, not yet, but it was a quiet desire, an unspoken wish to experience life again. For so long he had let his injuries define him. His life had become a cycle of bitterness, self-pity, and regret. Every day was the same, filled with empty luxury and constant reminders of what he had lost. But then Jasmine had come into his life, bringing with her an entirely different perspective. She didn't need wealth or power. She didn't need anything but a simple belief that things could get better. Her unwavering faith in the smallest of things, leftovers, hope, simple acts of kindness, had shaken him to his core. It was early in the afternoon when he decided to do something he hadn't done in years. He left the mansion. The journey was slow, each turn of the wheels in his chair requiring more effort than he cared to admit. But something kept him going. The streets outside were busy, people rushing past him, living their lives while he had been stuck in his own self-imposed prison for far too long. As he made his way through the town, he passed by the same shops, the same old buildings, and the same streets that had always seemed so familiar. Yet today, everything felt different. He was no longer just a man in a wheelchair. He was someone who was moving forward, not away from his past, but toward something unknown. It wasn't a grand journey, but it was a journey nonetheless. When he arrived at the small park on the edge of town, he paused. The air was cool, the sunlight filtering through the trees, casting soft shadows on the ground. It was a peaceful place, the kind of place he hadn't visited since he was a young man. There, sitting on a bench, was Jasmine. She turned when she heard the soft hum of his wheelchair, her face lighting up with a genuine smile when she saw him. "Mr. Blackwell?" she said, standing up. You came?" Thomas nodded slowly, his voice quieter than usual. "I came because I think I'm starting to understand. I've been living in my own prison for so long, I forgot what it felt like to just live. You gave me something, Jasmine. Something I thought was lost forever." Jasmine's eyes softened, and she took a step closer, but said nothing. She simply watched him, letting the moment breathe. There was nothing for her to say. He had come to this realization on his own. Her role had never been to fix him. It had always been to help him see that he could fix himself. Thomas continued, his voice tinged with emotion. "I spent so much time resenting the life I had, resenting what was taken from me. But I realize now that it's not about what was taken, it's about what I still have, and I have the chance to make something of it if I let go of the past." For the first time, Jasmine saw something in Thomas that had been hidden beneath his pain and anger. He wasn't just a man who had suffered a loss. He was a man who had found the courage to face his pain, to let go of it, and to move forward. It wasn't a miracle in the way she had imagined, but it was a miracle nonetheless. Thomas turned toward her, his face softer than it had been in days. "I don't know what happens next, Jasmine. I don't know how this will all play out, but I do know one thing. I can't live in the past anymore." Jasmine smiled gently, a warmth spreading through her chest. "That's all anyone can do, move forward, one step at a time." And for the first time, Thomas felt something stir inside him, an unfamiliar but welcome feeling. Hope. The two sat together on the bench, the world around them continuing as it always had. But for Thomas, the world had changed. He had changed. And as they sat in the quiet afternoon sun, it was clear that this was just the beginning. The following weeks were unlike any Thomas had ever experienced. No longer confined to his mansion, he began to explore the world outside, a world he had once deemed unworthy of his attention. Every day his wheelchair took him to places he had long forgotten, places he never imagined he would visit again. He walked, slowly but surely, through the bustling markets, the quiet parks, the streets filled with life and laughter. For the first time in years, Thomas Blackwell felt alive. Jasmine continued to visit him not as a savior but as a companion, someone who shared his journey, who witnessed the subtle changes happening within him. They would talk for hours, sometimes about nothing at all, sometimes about everything. She taught him the beauty of small moments, the joy of watching a sunset, the satisfaction of a simple meal, the warmth of human connection. It wasn't an instant transformation. Thomas still had his moments of doubt, moments when the weight of his past threatened to pull him back into the darkness. But each time he reminded himself of the choice he had made, the choice to move forward. And with Jasmine's quiet encouragement, he found the strength to keep going. One day, Thomas woke up early, his mind racing with thoughts of all he had learned. He had spent so long waiting for a miracle, but now he understood something crucial. The miracle wasn't in the grand gestures or the extraordinary events. It was in the everyday moments, the simple acts of kindness, and the willingness to see the world differently. He had been looking for something outside of himself to change, but the real change had always been within him. That morning, Thomas made a decision. He had been fortunate enough to receive everything life could offer: wealth, power, fame, but he had never truly lived. He had been so focused on what he had lost that he had failed to see what he still had: his heart, his mind, and the ability to make a difference. Thomas wheeled himself to the front door of his mansion, a place he once thought of as a prison. He looked around, seeing the mansion not as a symbol of his downfall, but as a reminder of the strength he had within him to rise again. Jasmine arrived soon after, as if she had known he needed her, though she never asked for anything in return. She simply believed in him. "I've been thinking," Thomas said, his voice filled with conviction. "I've spent my entire life building walls around me. I've used my wealth to isolate myself from the world, from people, from any chance. of real connection. But I don't want to do that anymore. I want to use what I have left not to hoard but to help. Jasmine smiled, her eyes bright with pride. What do you mean? I mean, I want to help people who are stuck, like I was. People who are living in silence, in pain, in isolation, like I was. I want to give them something that no amount of money can buy, a second chance. For the first time in his life, Thomas Blackwell wasn't thinking about himself. He wasn't thinking about what he had lost or what he still had to gain. He was thinking about others, about what he could give, not what he could take. The first step came quickly. He donated a large portion of his fortune to charities that helped people in need, particularly those who had suffered life-altering injuries like his own. He also established a foundation dedicated to providing resources and support for people in isolation, helping them rediscover hope and rebuild their lives. The foundation was simple, but it was a start to something much bigger than he had ever imagined. As the months passed, Thomas's life became a reflection of the very principles he had once doubted, that hope, kindness, and the willingness to believe could change everything. He didn't need to walk to be powerful. His strength came from the people he helped, from the connections he made, and from the belief that life, no matter how broken, could still be beautiful. One evening, as Thomas sat in the park where it all began, he looked up at the stars. Jasmine was beside him, her presence a constant reminder of how far he had come. You were right, he said quietly. The miracle wasn't in the leftovers. It was in the belief. In the choice to see life as something worth living, no matter what. Jasmine smiled, a soft, knowing smile. I think you found your miracle, Mr. Blackwell, and I'm proud to have been a part of it. Thomas looked at her, his heart swelling with gratitude. The girl who had once offered him nothing but leftovers had now given him the greatest gift of all, a new life, and he would never forget it. As the night stretched on, the world felt different, brighter, and for the first time in a long time, Thomas Blackwell knew that he wasn't alone. He had hope, he had purpose, and most importantly, he had a chance to make the world a little bit better, one step at a time.